our agenda. Are there any additions, corrections, or otherwise?
There are none.
Okay. I'll make a motion to adopt the agenda as it's been presented. Is there a second?
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Next is to approve the minutes of the April 7th Planning Commission meeting. Are there additions, corrections to that?
I had none.
I have none.
I had none. So I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of the April 7th Planning Commission meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Next on our agenda is a public hearing on a review of the preliminary plat, rezoning, and conditional use permit for a planned unit development for Lake Town 9th Edition as submitted by U.S. Home doing business as Lennar, located adjacent to the existing Lake Town neighborhood. Just to let you know how we conduct our planning commission public hearings is we're going to have a question and answer session with the staff folks that are here, Ben and Kara. When I open up the public hearing, you'll know it, and we will appreciate you guys coming forward to say what you have to say. So you'll hear about that in a minute. So anyway, Ben.
Thank you. So if I can start, obviously this project has had a couple different meetings already, so some of the people that have been in attendance at some of the neighborhood meetings have seen this explanation before, but just in case there are people that haven't been here, tonight we're reviewing the rezoning, conditional use permit, and preliminary plat for the Lake Town 9th Edition. After tonight, should the commission recommend approval, this project would be placed on upcoming city council agendas. The first being the zoning change would be on the council agenda for May 11th as a first reading, because we need to adopt zoning changes as ordinance changes. And then on May 26th, there would be a second reading. At that time, the public hearing on the zoning change would be held by the city council. At that same meeting, if the zoning was to pass, then the council would consider the preliminary plat at the May 26th meeting as well.
Just for the audience's sake, there's nothing preliminary about a preliminary plat. At the preliminary plat stage, we are conveying rights to the developer.
So a quick overview on what is being presented tonight. This map identifies both the rezoning boundary that's been requested, which is in blue on the screen, as well as the area being proposed for a preliminary plat in red. The rezoning boundary is just, if you recall back to the sketch plat, this is just the area that's been proposed for single-family detached homes. The area that had previously been included for townhomes is not included within that blue buffer. So this is just a zoning change for the additional single-family residential that would occur south to Marsh Lake Road on property currently owned by Lennar. The preliminary plat for the 9th edition in that red boundary is 99 single-family lots arranged on the property, generally described as being west of Victoria Elementary School. So a little bit of background on the preliminary plat. Most of this property did not become available to be developed until sewer got to about this location. This is the Wasserman Lake Woods development. So the trunk sewer, as part of this development plan, will be extended along Lakeside Drive, which is this east-west street that will tie in with Martingale at the intersection of Red Fox. That trunk sewer will also be extended south as this development in the future were to occur. Sanitary and water will also be extended through the plat. We'll have kind of a looping of the water main through these roads here where we have a trail connection between two cul-de-sacs. 8-inch sanitary and water goes throughout the remainder of the streets. Stormwater generally gets funneled through these stormwater ponds. We have 2 new stormwater ponds that are proposed as part of this development. Here where my cursor is one of the 2 ponds, and we also have a smaller pond down here off of Lakeside Drive. There's a portion of the existing property that will also get funneled into the existing stormwater pond in Outlot S that's owned by the city, and this was programmed previously to accommodate additional stormwater from this area of the development. As part of the preliminary plat and kind of related to the zoning, Lennar has worked to arrange the lots and has identified certain properties that would need consideration of reduced front yard setbacks. Those lots in the various pages of the preliminary plat are noted in green, or maybe they appear blue depending on how you view them. So there are a total of 11 lots that are requesting a reduced front yard setback, and I'll explain a little bit of that in a little bit. If we were to compare the original layout for Lake Town that's on the left side of the graphic to what's being proposed tonight, you will see there has been a change in some of the street connectivity, some of the general lot arrangements, mostly based on existing natural resources, wetlands in particular, that are limiting the ability to develop the property as was laid out on the image to the left. As part of this project, they are required to submit a preliminary landscape plan. As provided in your packet, they've identified putting back in boulevard trees along all the streets. They've also incorporated all of the replacement trees that are required for trees being removed from the overall site to put it back into and incorporate it within the lots within the development. So we will have basically an elevated landscaping plan throughout this 9th edition. Parkland dedication, this was discussed the last time the commission reviewed the sketch plat. At that time, during the sketch plat, we had a few proposals from Lennar on where parkland dedication could be made, how it could be made. Staff had provided some recommendations for how and where that parkland dedication had been made, and basically it was up in the air at the sketch plat level for where that location of parkland dedication could be made. There had also been some comments by the residents just identifying frustration, if you will, with the current arrangement with the playground access. Just noting that during school activities, they weren't able to use the playground facility because per our arrangement with the school district, the school has first right to that playground when they have their own activities or related school functions in progress. We did explore the idea of placing a new piece of playground equipment on Outlot S, which is this property here. It backs to 8 existing single-family homes on Carriage Drive. We met with those 8 property owners and a few others from the neighborhood to kind of explore what putting a playground in that property would mean. That property is currently owned by the city, so it seemed like a possible solution for that to be made. After meeting with those property owners, we determined that it wasn't really a viable option. It wasn't wanted by some of those adjoining residents that hadn't planned on seeing playground equipment on that property. The park committee has reviewed all proposals basically, and the most recently has recommended moving a play structure back to the city-owned park that is kind of southwest of Victoria Elementary School. They've just identified that the location is where they'd prefer to see it being explored. Haven't finalized what that playground set may look like or what would be involved. At a staff level, we still need to have some conversations with the school district to make sure that where it gets placed doesn't become problematic from a programming standpoint, because certainly the school, when it's in session, they use the playground, but they'll also send kids into kind of the open space that's adjacent, and we don't want that same conflict to be in place for people trying to use this playground, which is intended for the general public at all times and not to be also for the school district necessarily. One of the things that we've continued to talk through, so I had referenced the neighborhood meeting that we had with the 8 property owners to talk about placing a playground in Outlot S. We did also talk about a trail connection going through that property. I wouldn't tend to speak for those residents other than to say generally they would prefer not to see anything occur in this outlot. At a staff level and based on reviewing some plans related to our comp plan and our master parks plan, this connection provides a lot of benefit to the community and to the neighborhood specifically. By having this connection, we can, within the new development and the existing trail on Red Fox Drive, this connection creates a 1-mile loop within the development that I think would be a good benefit for all those that live in the Lake Town neighborhood to have that defined distance to be able to recreate within the space. One of the challenges that the developer was faced with that I kind of hinted at before was just the existence and magnitude, so to speak, of wetlands across their property. This map identifies where those wetland areas are. The kind of hatched green dotted areas identifies those wetland spaces. And what's kind of difficult to see on this image is just a generalized buffer that it surrounds those areas that's roughly 30 feet across. As a kind of a generic, this is what the wetland buffer would be. So they were constrained as they programmed this site for lot development. Some of the more specific concerns, and I'm sure those in attendance can clarify or add to this statement, but at least from a lot of the correspondence that staff and the developer have worked on with the neighborhood are outlined on these next couple slides. So parkland dedication I spoke to a little bit, just neighborhood concern being not having a defined location at previous meetings, so kind of having that playground or park function kind of up in the air throughout the process. That school agreement being preventative to them being able to use the existing equipment, but also there were comments made about having an accessible location to everyone in Lake Town, not just the new residents, not just the existing residents, but something that would work as a whole. Where I believe we've made some progress in that regard is moving that playground back to Lake Town Park. If I was to go back to the aerial, that location is very centralized throughout the entire development. It also allows for people that have kids of varying ages to, have one child doing some type of baseball, softball, soccer, or lacrosse, and maybe another child of a younger or older age could play on the playground or something to that effect. So allows for families basically to use that park to its full capability. And then as I noted before, that trail and Outlot S, creating that 1-mile loop within this new development is definitely a recreational benefit to the neighborhood. There's some lots on Carriage Drive that we spoke briefly about at the sketch plat phase that was reiterated by some of the neighborhood, both at the council when they reviewed the sketch plat and then also at the recent neighborhood meeting we held a couple weeks ago. Generally, from what we've heard, they don't like this side-facing homes to Carriage Drive because the majority of existing homes along Carriage Drive do face the street. Their garages are side load, so you'd have your driveway in and then you'd kind of tuck into your garage for the existing homes. They had asked the developer to consider having any of those homes on the 4 lots where you do have this side-facing function to possibly have that side load function available if the lots were going to face the adjoining new streets. That's not a floor plan that the developer currently has, but not to say that we know exactly what home is going to be placed on those lots, because as a city, we don't really regulate specific floor plans. We really deal in more the nuts and bolts of bulk regulations that deal with side yard setbacks and those types of things. There have also been some comments about with this lot arrangement, you have kind of this common backyard avenue or corridor that's able to be seen from Carriage Drive. Just having concern with seeing in terms of additions or other private recreational things in those backyards that wouldn't otherwise be seen if homes had faced Carriage Drive in the similar manner as shown. Again, where I think we've made some progress, if we go back to the landscape plan, there is a defined landscape buffer along those lots that's unique to any of the majority of the other lots in the development. By moving trees back into the boulevard, those trees are then closer and provide a more defined screen to those common rear yard areas. And we have basically verified with the developer that all the lot sizes stay very consistent with the existing homes, home sites adjacent to them. This was an illustration that Lennar had put together, just showing kind of that comparative difference to what they're proposing from what was requested of the neighborhood. So the image on top was generally intended to depict their current home plans, what that would look like to have maybe 4 homes in that stretch of roadway, and then the bottom image showing generally, and this was prior to some of the landscaping changes that had been requested to reintroduce that boulevard tree aspect to the neighborhood, what those common rear yards would look like from the street. So if you can envision, based on the new landscaping plan, this row of trees here would be closer to the street. Right now they're sitting down slightly in the valley. They would be up, elevated right off of the back of the tree, or back of the street, excuse me. As I kind of hinted on a little bit, there was a question about the continuity of the neighborhood from a landscaping standpoint, not just in the street trees, but just general landscaping. That is maybe a little bit different in the 8th edition versus the previous editions within the neighborhood, and they weren't happy to have seen the loss of the street tree look in the 8th edition. What I would clarify for the commission is that that movement of having trees not in the boulevard was a city request. We had a long number of developments where the city kept taking on the responsibility of maintaining those street trees, and we had since basically requested not to have them put in about the time that the 8th edition had moved forward. After discussing some of the alternatives to whether or not to just put maybe more of a consistent tree arrangement on private lots or maybe reintroduce them to the boulevard, at a staff level, we were comfortable seeing those trees move back to the boulevard, but we will have the responsibility placed on the future residents of this addition, whether that's through the HOA or signed specifically to those future residents. That will be determined as we go through the rest of the final platting process and legal documents are put together. All of the replacement plantings that are required for any trees being removed in this development are being reappropriated throughout this development specifically. In some cases, the city has basically looked at a landscaping submittal, said, yes, we agree that your tree quantity is appropriate for the development, and maybe that didn't meet their full requirement, so the city would take a cash payment for any trees that weren't replaced, and maybe we'd put them in parks, or we'd have another spot in the community to put trees. In this case, we said the residents have expressed concern with landscaping, so let's just appropriate those replacement caliper inches throughout the development. Subject of the HOA has come up. I think it was discussed briefly at the sketch plat meeting, but the 8th edition, when it went in, is under its own HOA. With not getting into a ton of details as to why, there's just generally been concern that long-term there may be benefit to understanding the option of having one HOA for the entire Lake Town neighborhood, both the 9th edition and previous and future, extending down to Marsh Lake Road. From our side of things, HOAs aren't really controlled by the city, but we have I've met with the current HOA board and spoken with Lennar. Both groups seem interested in getting together, and the city can help to facilitate just obtaining that information and making sure that both what's being communicated to the city is understood clearly, and hopefully we can provide some type of guidance to both parties that mutually help one another. Access and traffic management, just as you see normal when we have new development occurring next to existing homes. There's a general concern that the number of lots coming in are going to impact the amount of traffic, which makes sense. More lots means more cars, so there's going to be more traffic within the development. And as I had previously mentioned, there's been a lack in ability to have some of the connections that had previously been proposed just because of existing wetlands. And I wouldn't say that's something that Lennar decided on their own based on how wetland protection works and some of the various boards and jurisdictions that are in Minnesota. I don't know that they'd get a permit approved to fill in some of the wetlands to have those street connections as was previously proposed. What we've done since then to kind of get a head start on some of these traffic concerns, this year the city has specifically put out traffic counts at the intersection of Red Fox Drive and County Road 11. To date, the county has been the primary entity doing traffic counts on county roads. But we wanted to have our own traffic count there, so we have a baseline data moving forward for, what impacts can we talk to the county if we start to see that warrants are being met, to see where they are in the process of potentially evaluating future traffic management, whether that's a light, a roundabout, or whatever. Like the addition recently of having turn lanes at that intersection was a county move. It wasn't directed by the city. But maybe we can have better information up front so that we have that dialogue with the county to understand what their plans and timing are for those types of improvements. And we're also planning on setting the speed trailer out near the intersection of Red Fox Drive and Carriage to start collect some of that trip information now so that we can see as the development starts to build out, do we see certain trends or issues with people speeding? Do we have more accidents? Some of that information we're trying to collect now. Environmental impacts. I don't know that I'll read all those verbatim. Some of the things about people just being aware of some of the existing wetlands and wanting to make sure this development was staying out of those areas. There's an eagle's nest within the development that we talked about at the sketch plat meeting. The current development is not proposing any improvements of any type over towards where that eagle's nest is, and I think actually they may be, from a development activity standpoint, far enough away from that eagle's nest that they don't have any sort of impact to them, whether it's timing of construction or anything like that to deal with. And then there was concern raised at the last neighborhood meeting just about seeing tree removal take place, just being more respectful of the existing environment. With all the things that get juggled when you're looking at development plans, obviously we talked about wetlands, and there are a number of existing trees on the property. I would say the developers made a very good attempt at trying to minimize impact to the environment as best as possible. They're actually acquiring additional 10 acres from the adjoining property owner to wind Lakeside Drive in the arrangement that you see on the preliminary plat that splits two wetlands, and overall will probably minimize the overall impact to those adjoining wetlands. We do have a tree preservation and replacement policy in our ordinance that they are abiding by. So while it's never good to see a ton of mature trees getting removed, that does happen throughout the community, and we do have steps needed to replace some of that tree canopy. I think and then the other one that came up at the recent neighborhood meeting that was talked about a little bit more in detail than previous meetings, just general concern that some of the new homes and the proposed development will devalue that the properties beyond what maybe the market has done. Again, and this is certainly an opinion, but within the confines of what the city can do to help with some of these things, lot sizes are very consistent adjoining to existing properties. Lennar has had their civil engineer test basically all of these pad sites, which is why we have the 11 lots with a reduced front yard setback requirement, so that we can verify a 65-foot building pad on all these lots that would allow for the larger homes within the development, or larger homes within Lennar's offerings to be built on some of these properties. Street trees have been incorporated back into the landscape plan, so there's more continuity within the development. It won't seem like as much of a foreign object now. So they've done a really good job with that planting plan. And then having the expansion and connection of the trail system will just be a general benefit that isn't present today within the development. With that, staff would recommend approval, but I'd certainly open it back for the commission to answer any questions and open up for the public hearing.
Okay.
Oh, and I'm sorry, did receive one letter of correspondence from a resident from 1755 Carriage Drive. Makes a number of points specifically about the trail going in Outlot S, and basically pointing out environmental concerns with that trail going in.
And I have just to write off a question on the proposed density of 2.98 units per acre. Is that specifically to what we're approving tonight, or is that the entire plan?
That is specific to the preliminary plat. The 99 lots being proposed.
Thank you.
Ben, one question I had regarding the previous plan that you had up there as an image, other than the road network connectivity, were there any other substantive changes to the underlying plan than what was originally proposed?
Sorry.
This one here, yeah.
In short, I would say some of the lot sizes have changed. The location of that street crossing for Lakeside Drive has been changed. You can see kind of there's still a curvature there, but it was closer to where Lake Wasserman, yeah.
The lines down on the south, it looks like, yeah.
Yep. So it's now coming straight across. The reason for that location, there's an existing field road. Is that an accurate description? So we're trying to use that existing entity for the crossing, so we weren't creating a new crossing through that wetland.
Thank you.
And with the side yard setback at 10, what's the adjacent lots? What's the setback on the adjacents?
The existing developments in Lake Town have similar setbacks, and the Wasserman Lake Woods also has 10-foot side yard setbacks. The entirety of Wasserman Lake Woods also has a 25-foot front yard setback across the board.
With respect to the trail on Outlot S, what are the other options for the pedestrian traffic if they wanted to get from the park from the new, if you're coming across that wetland? Is it a longer route, or what are the other options?
They would simply take the sidewalk that would take them up to the north side of this portion of Carriage Drive, and that would wrap over. They would take a trail crossing then across Red Fox and then down to the school. It'd end up being just a longer segment.
Okay.
Can we stay on that point a little bit? I was interested in understanding a little bit more about the idea behind the interconnectivity. And just as a sidebar, when I think about the value of trails and connectivity, it feels like the interconnected nature between neighborhoods is as important, if not more important, than the connectivity within the neighborhood. I mean, the connectivity within the neighborhood happens naturally, but one of our stated goals is to interconnect the community, right?
Right.
And continue to build a network of trails to connect our communities and our neighborhoods, and keep that continuity. So this is tangentially related to the trail that you're talking about, but if we were to look at, for example, sheet 4 of 6, and just think about the interconnectivity of the trails that we're talking about.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I'll start with one intersection internal to the neighborhood, which is kind of in the middle to the left, that intersection of Primrose to Alphon Drive.
Here?
Yeah.
Yep, and we got that trail coming up. I wonder if there really shouldn't be a curb cut at the trail across the street
Yes.
to provide that connectivity.
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay, and so, yeah, yep, exactly. And so in the same vein, when we think about these 3 roads that extend up to Carriage Drive, each of them, I understand, have a trail at the west side of the street, which makes sense. I also understand that there is not a trail on the south side of Carriage Drive, but instead there's actually a trail along the north edge of Carriage Drive.
That's correct.
And so as each of these 3 trails at the intersecting roads, I mean, should there be a curb cut across the street to allow that connectivity? Otherwise, we have trails spilling out into a roadway without curb cut.
Yeah, we'd have to take a look at that.
Okay. So now if you follow along in that kind of same mindset, if we zoom back out, you know, that trail running along north of Carriage Drive is what you, Ben, just mentioned, is that being the alternative connectivity, right?
Yeah.
And so that comes down and that crosses Red Fox Drive. All the, you know, the Outlot S issue aside, just thinking about, you know, what is the safest and best connectivity. Initially, when I looked at that, I wondered if that controlled intersection, you know, where Carriage Drive comes and intersects Red Fox Drive, isn't a more natural connection and safer, and that it's at a location that a driver would expect, right? It's at a location that pedestrians would expect.
Sure.
And although, you know, I understand what the other trail is doing, the other trail seemed to sort of like want to be a secret shortcut. You know, it comes off of a secondary road in the middle of a block. Yeah. And then I also worry that it crosses Red Fox Drive at a location that I understand is probably driven because there's a existing crosswalk there and a trail across to the south of Red Fox.
It's purely using the existing
Right.
connection. So the trail segment you're seeing throughout.
That's also the main, that's also the main entrance into the,
Right.
into the school, and
Yep.
But I worry that it's
buses are just down there.
it's in the middle of an intersection. It's also on a bend, and so visibility and sight lines isn't necessarily ideal. And even though it exists that way today, I'm just wondering if that's a reasonable driver for that trail, and actually it would be better to encourage all that stuff happening at the intersection. And that's not driven by any of the conversation about Outlot S and its use. It's just strictly based on interconnectivity and creating safe, interconnected neighborhoods. And I'm just wondering, as an alternative, if that isn't a reasonable approach.
I can remember driving my kids to and from this school when they were younger, and coming down that hill out of the school, and kids, you know, at school time, kids being escorted to ride their bikes to school, and realizing that it was just a crazy. You're coming down the hill, the buses are coming from your left. You're coming down, and then wanting to make a right turn, and then having to look up and see pedestrians crossing the road right in front of you, right into you. It's goofy, to say the least. Good point.
I guess as a follow-up question on that, and maybe my memory is lapsing here, but during the previous discussion on this, there was an indication that that's already being used at different times, I think, it's already being used as an informal crossing across that outlot. Was it?
I had a comment from one of the residents back there that kids were cutting through some of the properties to get home, whether that was a regular thing or just a,
Irregular.
yeah.
Well, and I wanted to expand on that because the informal use of that raises the question of, with these new lots, and we've got a whole bunch of them coming in, are we going to see an increase of that across that outlot? And is it going to be random? Is it going to develop itself into a trail anyway, or what does that look like? And I think that's probably the counter question is, I know my kid will definitely not go up to the crosswalk cross if there's a nice vacant dart across. I mean, that, you know, from my perspective, but I'm just curious if that's going to naturally occur over time anyway, and do you want to control it? Or do you let it just do its own thing across that bottom of that outlot? And it's just an alternative question, because I agree with you. I think, you know, traffic's going to expect it there. You know, it's a logical spot for it. And how does this play out longer term, though, as we add more and more lots and more kids into the neighborhood?
Where do they go on the south?
The south.
You got if I go down south, yeah, right.
take
into
this
that- yeah.
trail?
Where does that trail go?
So there's a trail on Red Fox Drive
Right.
currently that
Yep.
starts to bend off
I see
the
it.
street, and then it will tie into this trail, come down, and then come back to the intersection here, or loop back over through the trails we were just talking about inside the development.
Okay.
Ben, are you able to pull up the view that you normally show us for planning versus the picture? Zoom in tight.
Zoom into where?
The outlot S. Do we have? There we go. So, where would it go? Would it come?
It comes
what's the
generally
distance?
through here.
What's the distance between the homes and the lots?
If I was generally going to say where it goes, and again, I'm pulling on estimation, so something like that. Because ultimately it ends up coming back up in here, so it kind of meanders through the space
And if,
and over.
correct me if I'm wrong, not wrong, this is kind of a gradual slope down to this pond?
Yeah, the most change in grade really occurs over here.
Okay.
It's fairly flat in this area across the property, and then it starts to pick up to tie back into that trail, which is why the trail as proposed on that plan kind of weaves around quite a bit.
Yep.
And there's landscaping proposed in this area as well, if I remember correctly, right? Is that on the south side of the trail or?
There was discussion when the playground was gonna go in that there would be landscaping, not that we wouldn't tie landscaping in with the trail, but at this point, we had been focused on getting the connection made.
And by landscaping, I mean tree plantings?
Correct.
Okay.
How many lots were proposed to have smaller front yard setbacks?
11,
11 out of,
99. And most of them are not, none of them are adjacent to the existing property, so I think I can, so have this one lot here,
yep,
the one just past the corner. There are 3 lots further down on the cul-de-sac here, so this one, and then 2 here. There's 1 lot here. These grouping of 5 on the south side of Lakeside Drive.
that's being driven a lot by
To
wetland,
get,
wetland delineation as well.
right, so part of the overall lot depth is to keep the wetland buffers within an outlot that gets deeded to the city. So then to create that 65-foot pad depth, to have that flexibility in home size, they need the front yard setback reduction.
And Ben, going back to that last slide I think you had, you'd indicated there was, the lot sizes were gonna create an opportunity for, for the various, floor plans to be incorporated into the 9th edition.
Yep.
When you say an opportunity, does that mean they're going to be available, or is that still gonna be left to the discretion?
At this point, it'll be market-driven, but the intent was to make sure that all the lots were sized to accommodate the various home series. So even when the Laketown First Edition went in, there were 4 or 5 different home types that were proposed to go in.
Do we have a current list of what's proposed, or no?
The listing
is the
right there.
proposed
So the
list.
Classic Series is one grouping of home
Okay.
floor plans. The Landmark Series is what's being built in the 8th edition today. The Next Gen is kind of the one that has like a mother-in-law suite type function. And then Ramblers are not something they've had in there, but some of the lots could afford them the ability to put in a Rambler on some of them.
Ben, and this is maybe for Kara as well, at least in the northern portion of this site, we've got quite a few properties that are backing up to each other and abutting each other. Can you comment with regard to the drainage and, you know, some of the challenges we've seen elsewhere in dealing with having slopes that are sufficient?
Do you want to take that one?
looking
Sounds a
at
little
me.
more sounds a little more engineer-y than planner.
Based on the preliminary grading plan that was submitted for that area, they've done a nice job of making sure that they have either enough catch basins to pick up the water with a combination of steeper slopes wherever they could. So this one looks pretty good so far. We'll continue to look at that as we move to construction plans. But so far, so good.
Thank you.
And this drainage goes into that existing pond, as you said, or
Yeah, I don't know specifically, but I think this is generally the line
Cut off.
where the lots would flow into this pond versus this one. So everything to the north would flow into this, and everything to the south would generally come over to this pond.
anything else?
I'm good.
For now.
Anything else?
I'm good.
So I'm going to open it up for the public hearing now. What we ask you do, there's a mic there,
Yep.
that you'll, if you want to speak on this, to step forward, sit forward, and state your name and your address for the recording. And we'd love to hear what you have to say.
Hello, my name's Linda Shiflett, and I live on 1855 Carriage Drive, which is going to be adjacent to the first home. I don't know if you can show where 1855 Carriage Drive is. And a few notes that I just want to speak about today. And I was a little disappointed that I didn't see them referenced in the deck that, Ben, you did a great job of putting that together. But originally, when we built with Lundgren, we were Lundgren purchasers, there were approximately 43 homes in that back area immediately behind my home, and now there are 53. So that's 10 additional new home sites that, with one less access road coming out of that area. So 53 home sites that will all end up on Carriage Drive. That's a lot of cars on a very high child populated area. So that's one of my concerns. Ben, is that something that you were able to look into at all in terms of the number of home sites?
You're correct in the number that you're stating. Yes, there are about 10 additional lots that are in that total area. Obviously, losing that connection here, that you're correct.
So can I ask why that was not mentioned in the deck? I mean, that's a pretty big change in the number of home sites.
Sure. Just generally, that number of lots is consistent with what we're having throughout the community, and most of them are fairly consistent with what is there. If you go to, sorry, find the right slide. So if you're comparing these two sides, if you look graphically at just the size of the lots, they generally were larger over here, and then this through street was generally smaller homes. I think you'd find a similar configuration where there are larger homes in through this area, and then some of the smaller sites are wrapped in here. So I would say generally, again, this being more of a concept where the developer didn't have all the information to know what they could or couldn't do at the time. They're doing a similar type thing, and you will also find when you start doing a cul-de-sac, typically you're going to end up with more lots in the development than not having a cul-de-sac.
Okay. My other concern was related to the size of the frontages, like the frontage, that street side of the width of a lot. And based on the original plot, it looked like the homes were more consistent with the 95-foot frontages that we currently have in the neighborhood. I think 95 is actually a low end of the average. We have some homes that are like 120 feet wide because of the side-loaded garages. And it looks like a lot of them are 70 to 80 feet, and that's a pretty big delta. So even though the average size of the lot might be consistent, we're looking at probably very long lots, but the homes will be much closer together. And I think that will have a different look and feel as well. And then one other thing is regarding the pooling of water that is behind, kind of where right behind my home, where the kind of the D used to be in the old plat. This is a very unique spring. We haven't had a lot of water, so we haven't seen the pooling, but in the past, literally, there are ponds of water back there. So I would be concerned as, someone purchasing a new home, unless Lennar has a really good way to tile that and really make sure all the water ends up in those reservoirs. I would think it would be very difficult to put a basement in some of those lots. And I don't think Lennar has a really good reputation, at least within our neighborhood, for dealing with those kind of issues after closing. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hello,
Richard Druce, 1905 Carriage Drive. It's the last house on the left before you go into Deer Run. Yep. Basically, the only concern I would have is, obviously, I'm not that impacted. It's not a personal thing for me, but other than I lived there since 2006, and that corner of Carriage Drive in Red Fox is very busy when you come out. So my question is, it looks like on the original plan, they had the road that came out on the south of the drainage pond there, where they want to put the path. Why is that changed? It seems to me that's a much more logical route to leave that road in and take all those homes and force them out to Red Fox Drive. And then they could go that way. You could have a trail right there, and then most of those folks will access the parks, the baseball fields, which most of that traffic goes to anyway. So it seems to me that if you drive people up onto Carriage Drive, especially in the wintertime, when the kids are going to school, that corner's on a slope. We've had people slide into the fire hydrant, into the sign there, and it's just a very treacherous intersection. And it seems to me that we're just forcing all that neighborhood to the north of that design up that way. And in the wintertime, that trail is going to be not used anyway, 5 months, 6 months out of the year here. So it just seems to me that somehow they ought to look at trying to get that road back in, maybe make that the park area, that green area. Why can't that be the playground area? So it's kind of, the pond separates it from the house to the people, and what's that space going to become in the future? That just seems much more logical to me, just looking at it from a topographical look. So civil engineers obviously know more about the wetlands and such, but long-term, it just seems to me a much better design than what's proposed here. So that's all I have to say.
Hi, Kristen Lebin, 1810 Carriage Drive. So I'd be looking at the side-facing lots down the backyards. And one of the things I've been in communication with has been the lack of transition between the new and the old, and now I'm hearing a whole bunch more of different style homes are going in. So it's, what I'm hearing is this is just turning into the aisle of misfit toys in the neighborhood. So we aren't really going to have much consistency among housing styles and designs, and it's just kind of be, hey, what do you want? Yeah, we can put that there. That's no problem. And, you know, we originally bought into a very high-end, nice neighborhood, and it's kind of degraded over the years. Partially the value has been the housing market, but a lot of that has also been the actions of the developer coming in and just kind of throwing in stuff and saying, hey, it's you know, it's market demand. Well, they're putting in those same houses in Victoria for $1 million. So, you know, why are they sticking in really low-end houses here and high-end houses elsewhere? It's confusing to us. It's driving our housing values down, and it's really diminishing the look and feel and value of living in our neighborhood. So we see this as a very huge issue. Likewise, having a dead spot in the major street like that where the houses aren't turned, it's not a welcoming feel. It doesn't, you know, if people put up fences, it's just going to be a complete dead spot. Unfortunately, the visual that Lennar provided doesn't do justice to the reality of the situation. Those are mature trees that they put in, and you know, I'd love my yard to look like a golf course, but it doesn't, and neither do my neighbors in the back. But we try and keep our front yards looking nice, and that's why HOA covenants are put into place for these front yards so that there is a presentable neighborhood. And we're very concerned that just isn't happening here. I also, Ben, I'm not sure if this is the time to talk about the proposed parkland where it is now. Can I bring that up quick? Sure. Where we're proposing putting the park in that current school space. You know, we're adding a couple hundred homes here, and so we're cannibalizing park space instead of adding it. So that's, you know, kind of a concern there for me. Like, for instance, CC United, the soccer program, is the second largest soccer program in Minnesota. So, you know, and it's just going to keep growing as we add these homes. And it's certainly not the only soccer program. So, you know, I'm like, well, you know, there's space that the community needs and wants. We do want a park, but I guess my concern is we're cannibalizing something that we're going to need more of in the future as well. So I know we haven't had an easy time finding park locations, but that's a concern that I have. I know it's an easy place, it's level, we can just drop in equipment. But I think that might be a short-sighted plan, so I just wanted to address that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Please.
Just a follow-up, I would like, if you could answer why they didn't put that road in, what's driving that? Why the change?
Primarily, it's going to be the fact that the wetland exists through this area, and if I pull up the aerial with grades, you'll see there is actually quite a bit more grade change in there, which means more fill within that area.
Yeah, but if you go back to the original,
Yep.
the developer bought the land. They obviously had a thoughtful design when they bought the land, and they didn't know that then?
Not to the level that they do today. And that would be typical. I mean, when you put a concept out there, you try to make your best foot forward, so to speak, with the information you have. But at a concept level, you haven't done your wetland delineations to know to what extent they are.
Yeah, I get that, but at the same time, it seems to me it's creating a real negative impact to the existing neighborhood.
Sure. The only other thing that would have changed since the original concept moved forward was the change in buffer requirements through Minnehaha Creek watershed as well, which does limit their ability to go into that area.
What about a nice bridge? Nice little walkway bridge. I just think before you move forward with this, just realize that that's going to be an issue. And that intersection is, I'd hate to see something happen there in the future because we just have way too much traffic going through that intersection. I mean, I think you could speak to most people that live in that neighborhood and they would concur with that.
Yep.
It just doesn't look that well. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, but
The road would have come through here. And this is the wetland boundary all the way in through here.
yeah,
And I think there's 75-foot buffers,
yeah.
if I remember right.
Anybody else?
I just, do you want me to introduce myself again? It's Linda Schiff. No, okay. I'm just curious, what constitutes the wetlands? I mean, how are they able to delineate what is a wetland and what's not a wetland? Because there's a lot of surrounding areas that are considered
They
unbuildable.
hire a wetland specialist that
Okay.
is certified in delineating them. Mm-hmm. I don't know that I can explain it. There's not maybe a more technical way of explaining it other than it is a certified professional that does that delineation for
Well, and
them.
I think I would just add that it's reviewed then by a panel of experts to make sure that that delineation is correct. So they don't just get to hire somebody and that person says they're qualified and says, yes, these are the boundaries. A technical panel is convened on site to review their delineation and verify that it's correct. And that's comprised of people from the watershed district and other state agencies that regulate wetlands.
So then, in terms of once something gets passed and Lennar's, given the go-ahead to build on those lots, if there are issues in the future regarding leaky basements and all of that, it falls on Lennar. Basically, they're responsible for fixing that, and then if they don't, the homeowners are basically left with. Is that kind of how it works?
If it's on an individual lot basis, yes.
All right, thank you.
Anybody else? I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing at this time. We heard some interesting comments. Is there anything we can do to control product in our developers agreements
In our development agreements?
to dictate the types of product that get built and the types that maybe don't?
That would be irregular
Okay.
for what we've done as a city.
Yep.
We didn't, on any other phase of this
Right.
development, dictate what they could or couldn't do.
Right. The thing that keeps boggling my mind, because we heard it at the concept plan, that the neighborhood really wanted a playground equipment somehow that they could access. And we found out that the playground equipment that is established in the park is somewhat controlled by the school.
It's physically on the school's property.
Right. We put it in?
No, they paid for
They
the
paid
whole
for it?
thing.
That kind of answers my big questions.
I guess just coming off of the comments with respect to the water up in the corner by 1855, do we have an idea or have we looked at that? Is there a ponding issue in there, or do we know if we're going to be able to address that with grading? Or
She was talking about ponding all through.
yeah, I think in particular, if I understood, it was just running along that edge, on that ridge, right?
Yeah, myself personally, that was the first I've heard of that location of water, so I'd like an opportunity to get a little more information
Yep.
from that property owner to make sure that there isn't something we're not aware of. But there's quite a bit of wetland there, so I'd want to take a look at where that area is compared to the buffer boundary
Yep.
and make sure there isn't something we aren't aware of in the area that isn't getting graded out. Now, some of the areas will be regraded as part of the plat, so that would be something I'd take a look at. Typically, we would be addressing that through the construction plan process.
Then I guess a follow-up question for you was the comment made regarding the traffic and the already perceived heavy load at Carriage and Red Fox. Do we have any traffic studies, or have we done anything along that, and are we looking at the loading for that intersection?
I definitely think we're going to want to start to monitor that more closely as traffic increases in the area, particularly at the peak time from the AM peak, the PM peak, compared to when school gets in and comes out, just to take a look at that intersection. And certainly, the city does have a stop sign warrant policy, so we'd be looking at whether or not, as traffic increases, a stop sign becomes warranted at that intersection. Myself personally, from a purely traffic perspective, would have liked to see those other two road connections go through, but even the one connection from Lake Wasserman Woods is not happening very smoothly. We have to keep having multiple meetings with different jurisdictions over wetland impacts, because in this day and age, any sort of filling of wetland is much more difficult to get approved, both through the Watershed District and the DNR and the Army Corps of Engineers. So wetlands are a challenge on this site, and they didn't have a delineation done at the time that they developed that concept back in the early 2000s. So it isn't until today that they have that information to just make decisions off of.
So we don't have a baseline today. Are we going to collect that relatively in short order then, or what are we
We've
doing
been
with that?
starting to collect data in the area. So we started counting Red Fox. We'll have to look at whether we want to count Carriage. Certainly both, I mean, the situation on Carriage is not any different than Woodstone Drive. If you ever, sorry Ariel, when you go over to Deer Run, we have literally this whole entire area dumping onto Woodstone, which is also a residential street that's 28 feet wide. They aren't collector roads. And all this Deer Run traffic comes out onto Deer Run Drive. So you're talking about pretty similar, I haven't counted neighborhood for neighborhood, how many lots are on it. Red Fox Drive is designed as a collector, so the intersection and everything would have been laid out with collector standards in mind. But with the school in that proximity,
Right.
looking at, what I want to take a closer look at is what school start and stop times are, you know, how many people are getting dropped off and picked up, and what pedestrian traffic might be in the area. That might change it from a traffic control perspective that we'll be looking at as these houses start to fill in.
One question I have related to that too, are these wetlands are here for a reason. They're here because they're absorbing kind of a water load that occurs in the natural environment. And by disrupting them, that impact goes elsewhere. In looking at cross-cuts and fragmentation of wetlands from a habitat perspective is one thing, but also from a hydrologic perspective is another. And as we start to hear things like ponding and other areas, by starting to slice through that, we potentially exacerbate those problems as well.
Move them.
So whereas regulatory issues would make those road connections extremely challenging, if not impossible, hydrologically, we could be doing some additional damage to that area as well.
Yeah. Just pushing and moving the
It's gotta go
problem
somewhere.
else.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that. I think fundamentally, those issues are important, but if the land isn't designed to, and the traffic is too heavy, then maybe you need fewer lots. I'll be very honest about that. That's the simple reality that I would look at. You have a plan when you first put it together, and then you do the studies and outcomes results, and then you have to modify. And road reconfigurations are one of the options, but it may not be the only option depending on the traffic, if those are the issues that they're facing. And I have a lot of concern about, and that even goes back to the trail concept. We've got a trail, we've got school-aged children, we got them in the morning, we got them in the evening. There's a whole bunch of different things that I think play into this particular location. And so I think that's where I'm looking to Kara to do some of those additional studies and get into that detail, because that's one of the concerns I would have with that.
Absolutely, I would agree with that.
One last question, I guess this one goes back to Ben. The other concerns we were hearing about the side lots, and she made a great point about, well, they did a great rendition with larger trees. Can we mandate larger trees as part of the landscape plan? Can we put in larger diameter to maybe address some of that if that's where we want to go there?
We could. I would say, excuse me, the city has minimum standards for trees that go in. So we obviously have a caliper replacement that's for anything that's being removed to be replaced with. Our typical size is 2-inch caliper, and most of the evergreens proposed are 3. So they are already trying to bump up that standard beyond our minimum. But certainly if there was a size more appropriate, we could look at that and credit them towards their caliper replacement.
I'm just wondering if that's an option, if we look at something more mature on those side lot areas, as an alternative to get us a little bit better screening in there early on, as opposed to, I think, the 20 years down the road of maturity concept.
Which is what they depict.
Which is what they depicted. I guess the last question, another question, Ben, I'm going to have, and it was raised, another point was raised again with the park location. I think there was a lot of questions early on during the preliminary plat stage about locations. It sounds like this is where they've identified again. But I do notice again across the street there that one kind of fell off. It's now fallow. It was going to be lots. It was going to be potentially a park. What happened with that location as an alternative?
So I know that the park committee reviewed that location and just functionally. So if you look at, again, kind of that multi-age families where you have kids of multiple ages, to have the playground down here, you kind of lose the ability then to have that being used while other activities may take place in this park. And I know that was one of the primary reasons why the park committee hadn't spent a whole lot of time on this, at least in my discussions with Ann.
Is that something that they were coming to, or was there a lot of feedback from the neighborhood, or what was driving kind of that scenario?
When Ann and I met with the neighbors to talk about this outlot, that was a question that was posed by them, that certainly that would be an alternative they would be more in favor of instead of seeing it within this outlot. And Ann had taken that information and talked about this, I think, as a backup to the school location. But right now, the recommendation has been to look at what that option might mean within the existing park space.
Okay.
Would that involve the schools then? to negotiate space for the.
It's not so much to negotiate the ability to put it in, it's more just the functional aspect of, do we need to have a fence around a portion of it so that teachers don't feel like they can't manage, or whomever's out regulating recess, so to speak, so they don't have their kids running from one to the other, and then you kind of lose track of, okay, is this kid someone I'm responsible for? Do they come with an adult, or whatever that situation ends up being? Those are the kind of the things we need to talk through with the school district. So we don't just put it there and expect that everyone understands how it's going to be used and managed.
I'm just thinking through it, the fence is something that's probably gonna have to happen.
Sure.
I mean, where you just to better be safe than sorry and not have to deal with it later on down the road.
And I know as Ann gets a little bit further into the process of identifying what is even going to go there, that'll be something that will be discussed with the school district so that everyone understands.
Ben, I just wanted to clarify with regard to the two different renderings of the orientation of the homes along Carriage. Is it, the intent of that is because it's still considered an option, either approach, or was it simply to demonstrate?
This was simply to illustrate
Right.
what the difference would be.
Okay. So are we saying that the proposed is the bottom, and that it,
Correct.
and that it's not really up for discussion
order-
any further?
In order for the top to even take place, there would be ripping out of a portion of that existing street, because we had never put in services to provide access to those lots as it is. So we'd have to tear up the street to make that configuration work. And at this point, at least from what we've looked at, I don't know that that's in the best interest of anyone to tear up that street just to put.
Did the original plat have the side yards?
The lots are still oriented the same way. Sorry. Yeah, you can see they're longer going with the street, so you'd anticipate then that the front of the homes would face these other streets. Which is why we didn't install services to begin with.
And ripping up our roads is a really not a good idea. Because these roads have the 2-foot sand section underneath them and the drain tile and everything. And once you tear into them, it's very difficult to get them to last the life of the street. So from a purely infrastructure perspective, I don't recommend it. Our ordinance even includes language that they're not supposed to be ripped up for 7 years. That's not always achievable. But.
Anything else? Anybody?
No, I'm good.
Be anywhere near a motion? Anybody anywhere near a motion? Dan?
No, are we, so we've discussed an
Yeah.
awful lot.
Yeah.
Have we suggested any changes to the conditions currently proposed?
Do you have some changes in mind?
No, that was just a general question. I was just quickly reviewing them.
I think I'd like to see, looking at larger trees on the side lots
Yep.
to address that
Along Carriage Drive.
on Carriage Drive. Yep.
And how about through those backyards? Probably not, just along Carriage Drive to buffer those people across
Yeah.
the street.
The existing.
Yep.
think we have a few to-do things, the traffic study, I think, and Kara's already on that, and you'll follow up
We wouldn't put
on
that
the
in,
water.
we wouldn't put that in the motion.
Not typically.
Nope.
Because we won't have data until the lots are actually there either, to
Right.
see what the change would be.
Yep. And that really doesn't affect the development per se. It affects signage and stop signs and things like that,
Traffic management.
traffic management.
Early in our discussion tonight, we talked about some of the curb cuts. There's the one interior to the neighborhood potential.
Right, and that would be something that we would certainly clean up with as we review construction drawings. If you want to just call it out specifically to make sure that it's addressed, we can do that. The ones on the north side of Carriage, I guess we haven't looked in great detail at that yet. I wouldn't necessarily want to volunteer a curb drop go where maybe a existing driveway may be.
We have to look at where the catch basins are for the stormwater inlets and some of that other infrastructure.
So those aren't necessarily conditions of a preliminary plat resolution, but more feedback and
Correct.
refinement
And
for
we'll take a
engineering.
look at that much further.
I think an area that we haven't gotten back to is that trail, the trail options.
How does everybody feel about it? I think Ken's onto something when he says that neighborhood kids might end up making it a trail, even if it's not there.
I guess my initial reaction is they may choose to do so, but with safety in mind, is it the right thing to enable and encourage? I'm trying to imagine you got a paved trail, and it's a shortcut, and you're zipping on your bike to school and go flying across the intersection there. Is that better than, I guess, encouraging the expected use at the intersection? But then we also heard from the resident that it's extremely congested at the intersection.
Right.
And do we want to
Drive all the traffic pedestrians.
we want to add all the pedestrian
Kids there too.
and the kids and the cars? I guess that also then feeds into, was it Kara's comment about, is there more control at that intersection that's potentially needed to address each of those concerns?
So the kids on their bikes would come north side of Carriage Drive, question mark, cross Carriage Drive, and then take the trail down Red Fox west side,
Still crossing.
And then cross.
and cross Red Fox again to get to the school.
Yeah, because there's a crosswalk there anyway,
Yeah.
right? They're still going to cross there.
Right.
Well, and they would have to cross Carriage.
But so they might come out of this neighborhood, the new neighborhood, go north across
They have to come up
the road to Carriage Drive.
Then they have to cross here.
Right, because that's to the north.
Yeah, it's on the north edge.
It's on the north side.
Yeah, so
And then
they
it comes
Back
down
across
anyway. So.
Carriage Drive.
So, I mean,
And
They
there's the
wouldn't cross here, they would come down
They cross there
through the
anyway.
defined crosswalk here or
But they would cross Carriage Drive back at the intersection because they're on the north side.
correct.
They cross
Plus
three
they,
Cross it twice.
Well, they end up crossing 3 streets.
right, they'd cross Alpha on both.
Well, if they're
sides.
coming out of the new neighborhood, they're gonna cross the street to get to the trail on the north side.
Instead of 3, you just have the 1.
Correct.
And cross Red Fox.
And if it's already, kids are kids,
They're going to take the shortest distance.
especially if there's a path already worn there.
Now, if we did look at that one, and I think that's the current recommendation, there was some discussion about maybe some additional screening or some sort of landscaping. So the question is that going to be up along the lot line so the city, the people have full use and enjoyment of the property?
Yeah, the one thing that we'd have to look at, we'd probably have to meet with those property owners again to talk through what that was, because the last meeting, at least from what I recall, the conversation, most of them didn't want to see some of the improvements made because it would obstruct some of the views that they enjoy today. So not to say that they wouldn't appreciate trees in there, but I don't want to assume that putting trees in there won't take out their view.
Yeah, no, and I do appreciate, the question is, maybe that's an option for them now, and I guess from my perspective, the flip side would be not to put it against the trail, because now you're limiting use and enjoyment of the rest of the public land.
Sure.
So, I mean, give some optionality, or at least explore that with those lot owners on the preferences they may or may not have.
I mean, having encountered some of the things that are going on right now with outside those lots, would the city have to send a good neighbor letter? Or would they have to ensure the extra amenities that are there?
We would probably need to have some level of discussion about them, yes.
You're the one taking all the notes, ready to form up that motion? We're not even close.
I'm still going through stuff. Actually, I don't think there's a lot other than the larger diameter trees.
Yep,
So if you wanted to add the larger tree,
yep,
maybe you just amend number 9, final landscape plan submitted to include
yep.
larger trees along
Increase
Carriage.
caliper inch trees along Carriage Drive. On number 9. Yeah, I don't see. Anybody else have anything else they want to see looked at? I'll make a motion to approve Resolution 1503, a resolution recommending approval of preliminary plat, rezoning, and conditional use permit for a planned unit development for Lake Town 9th Edition as submitted by U.S. Home Corporation, with the staff prepared list of conditions, with number 9 be amended to include increased caliper inches trees to be planted along Carriage Drive. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks. So next on our agenda, under new and unfinished business, is nothing. So we move on to council meeting updates. Anybody attend?
Yep, that's me. Bear with me one second. So I attended the meeting on 4/13. There's a couple topics worth sharing. One was that
To change what?
It's in the resolution.
It's in the resolution, sorry, yes.
One was that there's a public sculpture for the city that was shared.
Yep.
There's a model mock-up. I'm not sure if you've seen that, but it was discussed. And then also they approved Lake Point. That was by Hartman Communities.
Yep.
And they approved Arbor Woods. And then there was a presentation or discussion on some of the research that's been done on the community pool, viability of a community pool, and how the city is considering partnerships or doing surveys to gather interest.
It was included as part of the survey that went out to the 1,200 people that got the community survey. It was an option. I think the question was framed something to the effect of understanding there are limited resources, pick like your top 2 or 3 items, and I think they spelled out a few options, and I know the pool thing had come up.
Splash one was another one.
Splash pad was an option that we just went through the results today. I know the top was trail connections. Number 2, dang it,
Why do we keep forgetting number two?
I forgot to bring my sheet in.
Was it nothing?
No, it
Just out of
was actually, it
curiosity,
was
that
a,
was
it was a
right.
good, it was a good thing. Was it downtown development?
Parking,
Oh, parking.
Parking ramp?
There you go.
downtown parking.
Yeah, downtown parking.
Need more or have enough or?
They want more parking.
We can actually put that under miscellaneous, because I put that down as.
Okay. And then I think 3 and 4 both related to pool. One was like an indoor and one was an outdoor. So a pool did show up.
That concludes my report.
3.
Does anybody?
Was the band shell on it, or that was previous?
That wasn't discussed at that meeting.
There's been a lot of recent press about that.
Yeah. The naming was at the,
Yeah.
I think the naming was on that meeting, but it was just the naming.
Just the naming.
Wasn't any details about the bandstand. Everything else had been
Do we know
approved at
a
the-
schedule for that?
Do we know a schedule for that?
They're looking at each other.
They're just working through some final construction-related issues and hoping to get started soon. We're having, Ann and I are in regular communication with the contractor and the donor and the builder, so I think the donor is still hoping for a chance of Volksfest, or am I making that up?
They're hoping. Part of it, the biggest thing, the timbers that are kind of the biggest components of that thing were several weeks
Big, long lead
after
time.
being ordered before they could actually arrive. So that was going to kind of limit their timing a little bit, but they were hoping that that could happen.
Who's up next on the council meetings? Abe? You got it? All right.
Monday night. And then you wanted to talk about parking.
well,
Imagine that.
I know. I brought up to Ben, to get the banquet or the meet and greet.
Yep.
I'd read an article in the Star Tribune about Excelsior and about the things that, and it was kind of a negative on those communities, saying that we can't do some things because we have this. I'd rather us get ahead of that.
Yep.
Kind of an issue. We're saying, look, we want to take care of this. We're trying to take care of this. We understand that we're going to have a parking problem the more we want to develop this area. So I just thought that maybe starting to come up with some ideas about how we can address that before it gets too far down the road where we're, kind of scrambling at. People are saying we don't have enough. It's becoming an issue in the public. Let's, so we can come out and say, hey, we've been talking about this since.
Right.
Well, I can provide a historical or a hysterical perspective on downtown parking in that it's been on this planning commission and the city council for
Ever?
8 years. How long have you been coming to our meetings, Kara? I mean, it's been
2001.
forever. As long as I've been on the planning commission, it has been a subject of discussions. We were very early to adopt our shared parking ordinances that allows us to have that calculation and things like that. I don't know if we were first or pretty close to doing that. I think that some of this relief may come when they tear down the old city hall, which is going to happen, as I understand it,
Early June.
yeah. So that's going to create the potential for a few more spaces. There's always been discussion about making this into a deck, a parking deck right across the street from us. They're not cheap.
Right.
The city's not.
And that parcel alone isn't big enough to do
Right.
it.
And the city is not really going to be, I don't think, able to turn to its citizenry and say, oh yeah, by the way, now we need a parking ramp.
Well, that's,
And you're paying for that too.
that was what some of the things we're saying about Excelsior, saying
Yeah.
you can't put a ramp in because they're limited by space and the expense of putting it in.
Yeah.
With this though, being probably hopefully in a 20 to 30 year plan,
What?
the possibility of a light rail connection, if that would be a 30
Oh.
year plan.
Oh, Tony,
That might be the
That would-
5-year plan.
Yeah,
just think about the cities that are
I
east
know.
of here. I know. The likelihood of this, of any of us being alive when this has got a light rail trail, no, sorry. Thanks.
That train will have to fly.
Over a few
Over a
cities.
few cities.
We're leapfrogging, or no, we're leapfrogging Minnetonka. Yes. Just look at the cities and look at the, no.
So Jim, your comment about the being ahead of our time and innovative with the shared parking
Yeah.
approach, do you think that while that may have spurred short-term development it was in the interest of the business at the time, but it's actually now stifling their own business and growth now long-term because of the increasing congestion of business owners, right? So at the time, it was attractive that you didn't have to provide as much parking on site as what traditional code would have required. And now, while attractive, now you've got enough businesses
Right.
that simultaneously have the demand, and now that shared approach just simply doesn't allow it. And so now it's going to end up hurting businesses long term. And so now here we are trying to figure out.
Do we have a feeling / opinion that when we pass the shared parking ordinance that the businesses and proposed developers applauded us for that action?
at least from what I understand in reading through all the correspondence and previous plans, was the intent was to drive demand, and kind of the thought being, once we have the demand, then we'll deal with
Right.
the problem. So we're kind of at that point now where we've created the
We were
demand.
applauded by those same businesses that are now saying
Well,
we don't have enough parking.
agree.
because we helped them out when we would have forced them feet to the fire to build more parking.
Now it's our collective problem as opposed to their individual problem when they were building or developing at the time.
And we will be working on that this summer. So one of the things, I think I maybe mentioned it briefly, but we have moved forward with hiring Hoysen and Kogler to do some downtown planning for us. We have kind of a specific interest in seeing a plan for the 13.5 acres, but we also have, as part of that planning process, evaluation of downtown parking needs, to talk about strategy. What do our parking regulations need to be? We're going to be updating our counts on existing inventory and types, and trying to also evaluate existing land uses to see what those specific needs are related to our inventory as well. So I would say probably August or September might have a better feeling as to where we stand with that data, and maybe a general direction that would be recommended out of that analysis that would change, drive changing our ordinance to reflect whatever that recommendation might be.
Where's the biggest complaint of parking coming from?
The core here. So even with the grocery store opening up, which obviously everyone's happy about, it's been a while that people that, business out of the Clock Tower building had been parking there. They've moved kind of where they park now to probably the lot behind Victoria House and Vic's Bar and Grill. Victoria House was used to having, telling their patrons that that's where you park, because their employees would park out here in front of City Hall. City Hall's here now, so now we have, all of these people parking here. So it's just kind of this movement right now where there's not a defined, okay, if your employees are coming out of this block, this is where they should park, or this is where kind of the general parking is. Do we need to have certain parts of our public lots as time sensitive so that we allow for that turnover? It's not for employee in certain areas, those types of things. And then if we can identify if we need to build a ramp because we still have available property to be developed, is there better location or locations for that type of function to take place?
I just find it interesting because the only time I've ever had a hard time parking in downtown Victoria is during the car show.
Sure.
Or the bulk size.
Or the bulk size. So I guess I don't really see it as a huge issue right now.
Right.
I could see how it could be, but I'm kind of surprised that there's a lot of complaints about it.
Yeah.
And I think fundamentally, I think that's really the bigger question. I think there might be some parking challenges, but you're listening, the perspective from my thought on the shared parking is that helped developers who wanted to build. And now what's happening is the businesses that are occupying that space are finding parking shortage. And so I think that's the concern going forward, is balancing the desire to get the developers to develop the land versus recognizing the businesses that are going to occupy that space and their need as the traffic continues to increase. And I think that's probably one of the things, as you guys are going through that study, you know, that's really the bigger question is, as traffic continues to increase, the parking demand is going to ramp up. And I think, you know, personally, I don't like shared parking because you are literally Band-Aiding.
You're pushing the problem, kicking the can.
You're Band-Aiding to allow development, but you're really not doing the future tenants any justice down the road when they need those bodies to pay the rent so they can sell the services.
We had that exact discussion
Yeah.
back then, was that all we're doing is kicking the can.
Sure. If it's 100% shared parking calculation.
Right.
Because in some cases, when you have different users that operate at different times, having a 10 or a 20% share would be typical, because you're going to have time where they're not in business, they're not in their office, whatever's happening. But yeah, we do need to figure out what that
Well, and I
provided.
think even City Hall showed that. The City Hall library showed, you know, there was a concept on the shared parking loads, and I think those loads we might have been a little rosy because we're seeing heavier loads, I think, than anticipated, right?
And even the grocery store
Sure.
has a higher demand than, which is nice to have it open again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So is there anything specific, Derek, you're hoping to incorporate into our discussions, other than it's an issue?
Light rail, I mean, wait.
Go ahead. Go ahead. I'll hold my breath. I live along it.
He's younger than us.
I live right on this trail.
He's not Rosie? No, I just wanted to, want to get the conversation started, so maybe we can start to think about removing the Band-Aid if it's to that, if and when we get to that point. We've already said we know it's a problem, maybe we should just do it, and we do it faster than doing it slowly and painfully.
This the guy with all the hair on his arms and legs.
I think
the Band-Aid with the duct tape.
I think the reality, though, is it's a funding issue more than anything else.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, that's what we're going to be dealing with, is who funds it?
Right.
The developers or the core, or does it go to the taxpayers, or what's the right blend to unwind the Band-Aid?
When can we look at something like what Chanhassen has now that they didn't have 10 years ago, which is a bus,
The park and ride?
the parking lot for a bus? While we grow it, the bus would be a lot sooner. I would assume just a commuter bus or a flyer, at least out to one or the other. Would Met Council have any ability to get?
Well, see, Southwest Transit is a completely different animal than the Met. Sorry, I'm forgetting what the name is. What's the other bus service that handles the rest of the metro? MTA. So the Southwest Transit was an agreement started long time ago that was Eden Prairie, Chanhassen, Chaska, and Carver. I mean, even though Carver just got their station, they were part of that original group. We need to have a conversation to see, what is it?
There used to be a stop at the rec center.
Really? Huh.
That wasn't long ago.
There wasn't enough demand to maintain
The last
it.
10 years, for sure.
But if we start talking about ramp options, probably reintroduces that conversation with them to, hey, we're providing kind of this fixed parking entity. Can we
The
also,
comprehensive plan discussion about that was to place that down south on 11.
11 and 12, or 11 and 10,
11 and 10.
sorry.
Is that not developing as fast as originally thought during those?
South of Marsh Lake Road all the way down to 10.
Okay.
Take 11 all the way down to 10. There's a beautiful sunken chunk of
And that's
land.
where we were also talking about the corporate campuses.
Right here.
Right. This is, this area right in there is lower in topography than,
It'd be
So
more of
the
an
idea of
employment
putting-
center in that
and the
area.
employment center and access to 212 and blah, all that stuff.
Okay.
So putting it down there doesn't help downtown,
Right.
unless Floyd's and moves down.
And my wife.
Chanhassen has 2 park and ride locations, so it's
Right.
not to say that we couldn't also.
Absolutely. But, yeah, the discussions about downtown parking have been,
I mean, I'm not saying put a bus down here, because that would just tie it, I mean, that'd be a nightmare almost, for now, unless we had that additional money, source funding, you know, where we take a leg, they take a leg, and find somebody else to take a leg.
The only other thing I was going to mention, since we're on miscellaneous, Jessica Van Voorhees is a new employee. She's a planning and public works technician, so she's helping us with a lot of day-to-day things, but she'll also be attending planning commission meetings to take minutes.
Welcome. How long have you been with the city now? 3 weeks. Great.
Very excited to have.
training her in, right?
That's right.
The two of you are training
Yeah.
her in, right?
Needed a release valve already? You've only been here a couple of months.
Ouch. It is planning and public works.
So you get Ann and Ben? Mm-hmm. Ooh. You get a good mix.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Anything else tonight?
I just want to make one comment. Ben, thank you for all the preparation and materials for in
Yeah.
advance of this meeting. I thought
Sure.
you were very well prepared, and I thought so were we. So
Yeah.
Good.
Thanks for sending
care
all
of
that
that
stuff
stuff.
today.
Thank you. Yeah.
That helped a lot with the,
Yeah, just getting our head around some of the history was important.
Yeah, and it's taken this whole time for me also to get up to speed on all the various things that have
So do we have
happened
an
in the
account?
past. Huh? We don't, but I got in touch with the right person that was nice enough to just send it,
Are they on Landshark or what are they on?
Landshark. Apparently we have had an account that hasn't been touched in about 8 years. And really, other than, if I wasn't looking for a declaration of covenants, we have all the recorded documents on our own Laserfish digital network, so that was the only reason I had to go, is it's a private document, so we wouldn't have had a copy of it otherwise.
Maybe we should make them in the future, provide you that as part of your package.
Right, yes.
I will make a motion to adjourn.
is there a second for that one?
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
You know, I was just getting ready to frame up that motion you took over. I was just trying to figure out how.